All right, episode 169 of the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast. Welcome back. This is Jeremy hosting today's question and conversation. And before we get into things, I've got Sid with me. Sid, how you doing?
Hey, really good, Jared. This is great.
Yeah.
Love being here.
So we're going to get into the meat of the episode here in just a moment. But before we do, kind of want to set the stage because I know we got lots of people listening, some people that are new. If you're listening live as these episodes are dropping, it's the fall of 2022. And if you're listening in the future, we hope it's great. But we've been doing some things this season, and we've got some partners in this season of the life of our organization in Youth Worker Community. And so we just want to let you know that the podcast is possible because of our lovely partners. And we want to tell you about Christar today.
Man, dude, Jared, I love Christar. My friend Tristan, who was, by the way, a youth pastor for like a number of years up in Grand Prairie, Alberta, is now running this global organization called Christar, which does missions for like people who are hard to reach in hard to reach areas. Do you know what I mean? Around the world. And we love them so much. They've been partnering with us. Here's the deal, Jared. One of the things I love about Tristan and Christar is they're not just taking people on missions, although they are. And if you're thinking about doing a missions trip, we would say, hey, you should connect with Christar. We think that they've got some really great and helpful things that they're doing you should be a part of. But they love talking about missions. So we all have questions about the value of short-term missions. I think, Jared, some of us have questions around the ethics of short-term missions sometimes and how they're most effective and helpful. And Tristan is really thoughtful when it comes to those conversations. So if you're thinking about missions, we would encourage you to reach out to our friends at Christar. We love the work that they do, and they would love to have a conversation with you. Hey, Jared, where can they connect with them to have that conversation?
So in the show notes, we'll drop a link for both their website, but also a way to just book a call directly with Tristan, who is their director, as we mentioned. And even if it's just a personal thing, if you're ever thinking about, I'd like to do a trip myself, even if it's not with your youth ministry or you're thinking about, going overseas, drop them a line. They would love to connect the dots for you in that kind of way.
Love it.
All right. Well, let's jump into today's conversation all about young adults in our churches and ministries.
Welcome to the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast. Youth ministries rise and fall on the volunteers. So we are here to encourage and equip you. Join the conversation as we tackle the practical questions you are asking so you can help the next generation know Jesus.
All right, Sid. So today's question, how do we continue to engage, or how do we engage our graduates or young adults that don't move away after high school? So this is actually a conversation that came in off of our website, somebody that's a listener, and they want us to have this conversation, which is always fun. We leave my email and a link in the show notes. You can drop in your personal question about youth ministry. This is a little bit outside of what we would typically talk about. So we're often thinking you as the volunteer, how do you be a great small group leader? So this is kind of on the edge of that, but thinking that honestly, we do our youth ministries, we see students graduate, and a lot of times we think about then sending them off to like university or they move. But for many students, for some, they stick actually in town. And then we've got this interesting question of like, what's next for them? We often, if we have, youth ministry obviously is running, but very few places have young adult gatherings. And even, are we meant to have young adult gatherings? All of those kinds of questions start swirling around. But the bottom line is we want their faith to continue to grow. What do we need to do as volunteer youth workers to help with that?
Well, and Jerry, the last research project we were a part of, Renegotiating Faith, addressed actually this question, right? We looked at the transition from life in high school to life after, and what do we do kind of pre, mid, and post that transition to help them settle into this new space where they can carry on, in a really healthy way, this faith that, was established as an adolescent. And I think we play a significant role as a volunteer youth worker who's been seen as a mentor in that life of a young person. I think we should acknowledge, man, our role can be really important during this time right here. So I love the question. I think the question is really important and good for us to be considering if we think about, running a responsible youth ministry where we don't just drop our kids off at the end of grade 12. I think it's important for us to think about. I love it.
Yeah. And for some of you, like this is really important because you actually have students that you were investing in last year. And then now they're around. And so you still have a relational connection to them. So you're like, am I supposed to do something about that? Like what's my responsibility? Even if I don't have them in a small group right now. Maybe you just have like other volunteers in your youth ministry. They're other young adults. They've stuck around, they've graduated. And so you kind of see them. You're wondering if there's something I can do to be helpful. Or maybe you just, in your church or ministry, maybe more so in the church world, like you see them show up on a Sunday or they're kicking around and you recognize them because they're from your youth group, but you don't know if they've actually landed anywhere, integrated into whatever's next for them. And maybe just don't have like a clear path anyways. So like, what should we do as volunteer youth workers with these particular young adults in whatever category that we find them?
Yeah. So here's my first thought, Jer. I actually think that if you're a volunteer leader, and let's say you've been pretty committed to like a grade 12 small group. Let's kind of frame it that way. This is you've been your primary connection. Maybe you've done it for 1-2 years, maybe for like longer than that. You've journeyed with them. I think the first thought that comes to my mind is would you consider to see your role with those students structured extend one more year? You know what I mean? So go, like they haven't just like aged out of they may have aged out of our program, but they haven't aged out of our relationships. And so as a small group leader say, hey, I'm actually going to commit to staying with you for one more year in a real, kind of structured relational role. We'll continue to meet weekly. But I'm going to shift my thinking to go, you're in a new stage of life that I'm now journeying with you on. I've actually come more beside you in that sense. Do you know what I mean? I'm helping you think about like more next stage of life issues that I'm dealing with as far as like relationships go, as far as like thinking about, vocation goes, thinking about, certain life skills, those sorts of things. So you kind of come alongside in that way. It's maybe not quite structured in the same way, but you're being really relationally present. And here's one of the things that we learned, Jared, is we learned that with this phenomenon, extended adolescence, even identity formation has kind of extended itself beyond like high school. We used to think that high school, middle to late adolescence was really key in identity formation, and it's really important. But with extended adolescence, we're seeing those first 2 years after high school being really significant in terms of really solidifying who we are. But that happens best in the context of community. And as a volunteer leader, consider that you might actually be the primary catalyst for that continued community that can really establish the faith of that young person. So I just think, Jared, like oftentimes we used to think, hey, let's have our volunteers drop back into grade 9 or maybe even junior high once grade 12 was finished. And I'll just never forget when Anya, one of our volunteer leaders in our ministry, came to me and just said, hey, I'm actually committed to staying with my young ladies for another year. They need me in this kind of transition year. And so I'm going to commit there for this next year. I'm like, that's a beauty. So I think the first thing is just consider as a volunteer leader that you would extend especially your kind of relational or mentoring role with your group beyond just grade 12. And I think that would be really helpful for the faith of those people.
Yeah. And for for a lot of you listening, that might mean that you're actually playing two roles because, your group ministry isn't actually large enough that you're only with the grade 12s. You've been with like all of the high schoolers. And so this year, maybe you think about, okay, we graduated a couple out of our group. I still have got others that I'm coming up through. And so, even just the matter of being able to reach out and just check in, see how they're doing. Have they connected with the new church? Have they landed, or if they're in your community, are they, coming still to church? Have you been able to, just ask them how they're doing spiritually? Those kinds of things would be really valuable. Even as a volunteer, if you can add that kind of to the roster of your week. Okay, so we're going to consider extending our role and actually checking in relationally with them after they graduate. Okay, that's good. Anything else that you think would be helpful as we look around and we see these young adults a part of our church or ministry?
Yeah, I think the second thing, and this was really interesting for us in Lethbridge as well, Jer, is maybe just accept the idea that your youth ministry might be your most effective young adult ministry as well. And here's what I mean by that. Many of our youth ministry leaders are young adults. It's, they have discretionary time. There's kind of this age aspiration for teenagers where they look to that age group. There's wonderful energy there. All the things that can allow them to fill that space really, really well. And I just think that maybe we should go, maybe it's okay that our young adults who have graduated from grade 12 are still involved in our youth ministry, and this is a place of community for them as well. Now, it's different. They're not community in the sense of continuing to remain peers with the youth ministry in particular. And this can be a little bit tricky, but rather they have leaned into a greater role of leadership, which I think is really important for young adults to have a sense of contributing. Like we're actually now investors in the ministry. And Jared, here's what I think that might mean. I think it might mean if I'm a volunteer leader who's listening to this, and I have 1 or 2 grade 11 or grade 12 students, when they're in grade 11 and grade 12, I'm already suggesting to them, hey, what would you think about being like a leader for our grade 7 or 8 kids? Even while you're in grade 11 and 12. and shift the way they position themselves towards the ministry as actually real contributors and leaders. And then when they graduate, they're already in that space where they see themselves as leaders with the younger students. They no longer have positioned themselves primarily as like peers within the ministry. So I think that's really helpful. And now that actually becomes a place where their faith continues to form, but they're in a place of responsibility, which is really important for them to shift into. I think the other thing that means though, Jer, is that in our youth ministries, we also accept the responsibility that our job with our volunteers, and if you're a mature, volunteer leader, so you're leading kids who are grade 11, grade 12, I think you can own this as well. That within our youth ministry for our leadership team, we're not just about having them like volunteer in our ministry, we're actually about discipling our leaders. So we care about investing in their spiritual journey. We care about developing community together. We look to support them emotionally and relationally. And so therefore, again, for a young adult, they're not just giving, but they're also being invested in by that ministry while they contribute to it. And then they become a part of that investment as well. So, Jerry, I just think the second thing is just go, it's actually okay that our youth ministry may be one of our most effective young adult ministries, but I think the key is that we change the role for them within the ministry, which means they're now an investor or a leader in the ministry. And that probably begins around grade 11 and grade 12 to start that transition for them already, where they're investing with a younger group. And I think that's going to be really helpful when they transition out of grade 12. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And because I know we're talking to volunteers, I want to make sure that sometimes this stuff can sound like it's meant to be like a program or like a big accountability to you. But honestly, it can just be making sure that the culture of your volunteer team is that you would pray for one another, or that before the meeting, like just do a simple check-in. And kind of like what we're supposed to do as believers for one another anyways is the kind of thing that I think we want to invite everybody into that's on our team. And that gives you space to be able to actually, be discipling each other as peers in ministry, even if there's an age gap or something along those lines.
I love that. I think that's brilliant. Yeah.
Okay, and then anything else that you would think of to help our young adults still?
Yeah, here's the final thing. And Jerry, I love how you shape this as actually just being good Christians. You know what I mean? Like that's actually what we're asking each other to do. And I think as good Christians, we always want to help lead each other into again faithful mission, like faithful service, faithful mission. Here's one of the things, Jerry, that I think that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I think sometimes we think doing mission is kind of like the add-on or the extra to being a follower of Jesus. It's like where the more mature people go. But when I read the scriptures, there's actually no difference between being a Christian and being on mission, that they actually go hand in hand. And here's what I want to say with that. I think as young adults, it's really important within our church context to be seen as contributors and to have opportunities to contribute and invest back into the church. I think that's the way that our young adults will continue on in the church life and grow as leaders, way beyond their time in our youth ministry. So as a volunteer leader, you can do that by inspiring, by coming alongside. For some of you who are volunteer leaders who are maybe a little more older, you've been a little more established in the church, you could even come alongside other church leaders and advocate for your young adults to say, hey, are there spaces in our church where we can really put energy behind or resources behind our young adults who are doing ministry? Or can we position them in places where they could lead us in like serving our community, serving the needy, serving the, whatever that looks like in our ministries. And so I just think if we can have that really strong shift in our thinking where we can create space where our young adults are seen as real contributors and not just seen as contributors, but we create opportunities for them to lead our church and our ministries in contributing to others, especially when we think about like kind of younger generations, that's a gift to our church, but it's a huge gift to our young adults. And all the, the research that I've been reading, and I talked with an author, Beth Stephenson, who's done work on helping young adults re-engage church. They just said the need for young adults to be contributors early, even before belonging and believing. If you're thinking about bringing new young adults into your church, that's a different story, is just really important and significant. And I think we can be advocates for that as volunteer leaders in our ministry who know our kids. And in a way, what we get to do is reintroduce our students back to the church. I want to be careful about that language, but there's the sense that who they are now is different than who they were when they were in grade 7 or 8. But sometimes people don't create space for that, but we as leaders have seen the shift and we can do that for them. So I think just having that kind of a vision for the young adults of our church will be really important. Jared, can I say one other thing?
You can say whatever
I
you
want
want.
to say, yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah, go for
The
it.
other thing I just want to say, I know we always get a little nervous when I have like this thoughtful add-on at the end, that it's also okay for us to advocate for our young adults when they graduate from our youth ministry to enter another good church in our community. Okay. And I think I think it can be part of what I would call the process of differentiation, like kind of separating yourself from some of your like practices or environments that have been a part of defining who you are as an adolescent, to create space for it to become your own. And I'm just not scared anymore of like my sons going to a different church than they grew up in with their mom and dad, and they reestablish themselves there, known more by their first name than their last name. Do you know what I mean? And becomes their space. And I would just say, don't be afraid of also advocating for that. We are a part of the great body of believers, and we want them to be in a church that loves Jesus, loves the word. Do you know what I mean? Loves mission. And I have no problem with celebrating that kind of movement as well.
Yeah. It makes me think, one of the churches I worked in, Connexus in Ontario, our teaching pastor, Carey, used to say that when people would ask him, like, hey, where's the young adult ministry in your church? He'd say, oh, it's right here on a Sunday morning with 2 services. And there's a lot of other people in different generations that are a part of it, but that's our young adult ministry. And at some point, age segregated ministry isn't maybe the most helpful. And so what I like about thinking about that integration into the church is it, again, doesn't have to be programmatic. You're a volunteer. You're not starting a new church program. All you're doing is you're either convincing somebody else, or you personally are finding that young adult that you've noticed and personally want them to be a part of whatever it is at the church. Invite them to come alongside you, invite them to sit with you, invite them to be an usher with you, invite them to whatever it is. And that personally wanting them is actually, I think, what ultimately we all really want.
Dude, Jerry, I think what we have to remember is that our youth ministries are, we're not here to run a program. The programs facilitate our role as simply followers of Jesus with other people. Do you know what I mean? And when we can shift that mindset, then we're not leaving these kids when they leave the program. Like, we're continuing to come alongside and journey with them as fellow followers of Jesus. And it's beautiful.
Yeah, you don't have to have the hippest, coolest music or the most, interesting design or whatever it might be. If you actually just want these individuals and you talk to them like you actually want them and you invite them, like, they're going to be drawn to the place, because who doesn't want to be wanted somewhere?
Right.
Very good. Okay, last words before we wrap for today, Sid?
No, that's really great. I just want to say again, volunteer youth workers, what you do matters so much. Thank you so much for your work and for your love for the students that God's placed in your care. And we just really appreciate you so much.
Right on. We'll see you guys next time for another episode of the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast.